Guy back with you today, hanging in there with the hard surface theme. I'd like to talk about scratching. Probably not something you want to hear from a man, but I mean specifically the scratching of a hard surface flooring. There are many tests that address this, and I'll go over a few of those today. But the first thing we need to do is probably cover the definition of scratching. I always try to use the end user endpoint in my mind when we talk about things like this because that's who is complaining about it. And their point of view is probably more important than what Lab Guy might think in this case. Most scratching to an end user would mean dragging a piece of furniture on the floor, or maybe what their dog might do from its day-to-day living. That's not my technical definition, but it should be what any reseller of flooring should pay attention to. Microscratching is what many consider to be scratching, but I say that's more of an abrasion or wear. It's not really a scratch. To scratch, there must be a breach of the surface structure. It's a visible issue, not something that you might need to look at a microscope to see. Think of your sister fighting with you, and she drags those claws down your arm. That's a scratch. Pivot areas at an entry door or at the bottom of a stair, where eventually you see visible damage, that's what I call abrasion. Now, dragging a refrigerator across the floor and leaving a hole when you sit it down, that's actually called a gouge. All of these are technically scratches, but I separate them so that we can talk about the tests that match up to each issue. I'm still learning the video process, so bear with me as we try to look at different machines and the results from those tests. Lab Guy is a lab guy, not a video guy. Abrasion is what I call the gradual wearing away of the top surface. The most common test for this is the Tabor abraser. This test is couched in two ways. How many cycles does it take to wear through the entire wear layer, or how much weight is lost per 1,000 cycles, or per one cycle? It's my contention that the most useful procedure would be to report the amount of cycles when 0% of the gloss is changed, or when the gloss change is an X number, or the color change is X number on a grayscale. The consumer doesn't care how long it takes to wear completely through the wear layer. They care about how long it takes for the floor to look like a piece of junk. Here's what a floor looks like when it's completely worn through. This is the Tabor abraser actually running on the sample. Another type of abrasion test that we conduct daily is EN 16094 microscratch. An abrasive pad is actuated in a very specific pattern on the material surface. This test does incorporate some of what I spoke about earlier, as you do get a gloss rating change and a visibility rating. The problem with the test is the weight per square inch, or per square millimeter for you Yanks. It's too low. There's not enough damage created to separate the good finishes from the poorer finishes. Here is the Martindale device in action, and you can see it's not causing substantial damage. Now to some scratch tests. These are the ones I think might produce the most valuable information, starting with the Hoffman scratch, ASTM D7027. This test allows the lab guy to apply weight to a stylus, and the specimen is then rotated with the stylus on the surface to see if that weight will result in a visible breach to the surface of the material. Lab guy adds weight until the scratch is visibly present. This establishes a great comparison of all finishes, as it has an empirical value of a force load being applied. A similar but more rudimentary test is the Mohs hardness pens, or even the D3363 film hardness by pencil. The EN424 provides a furniture leg scratch, and this test simulates a single leg of furniture being loaded and dragged across the surface of the floor covering. It's a great real-life test because that's how scratches occur, but the problem is it only has one type of exposure material to that floor covering surface. Obviously, there are many types in today's world of chair legs with chair protectors and chair surfaces that might involve more or less of a scratch potential. So to understand the real rigors of what that test should be, we would probably need to modify some of those to be more real life. The Hoffman has a cantilevered stylus that you can move left or right to add or subtract weight from the stylus force. Lab Guy did create a scratch test over 20 years ago when I was about 4, using a device that reciprocates on the sample, and it can be loaded to virtually any weight. Lab Guy chose a very specific 3M pad to be applied to the test specimen and then be moved back and forth across that sample for 200 passes. After those passes are complete, the specimen is rated for any gloss change, visible scratching, and color change, specifically light to dark. In my opinion, this is the most encompassing way to look for issues from scratch, as it answers all of my issues. It has enough abrasion and force to actually show a scratch, and its metrics are reported will also show a delta for the comparison to any other finish. Thanks for listening. But the bottom line is, when you need scratch testing done, or any other kind of testing, just call the Lab Guy.